name is Kenita Ballard. I am the resource teacher with AIS Elementary Schools from Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. And virtually present are the other members of my team from Zone 1, 2, and 3, and high school, and middle school as well. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and continue on with our presentation. Avon is here to present with me. Avon, could you share the screen, please? And so while Avon is getting the screen set up, I'll just speak to that this is part of an ongoing series in which we are discussing a specific component each day this week of a tool that we developed that is based off a district tool called the Affirming Racial Equity tool, the R tool. And this is the NTI version of it, so to speak. So with that being said, let's
looks like we have it. Yes, there we go.
Yes. Are you ready for NTI? And we are specifically talking about providing racial equity through prejudice elimination. Avon, go ahead, next slide. One thing that we want to establish in our introduction is that we are currently in the right now. NTI is not the new normal, but it is our current situation. And we want to stop and think about our diverse populations and how GCPS can not only continue to support our diverse populations, as it is something that aligns with one of our pillars, the racial equity pillar, but how can we also respond to some of the unique challenges and things that we are seeing during this time. So let's just take a moment to comment in the chat box, or you can speak up about what issues of prejudice might teachers come across during this time, or why is there a need to build understanding of others during this time. So I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of seconds for individuals to speak up or respond in the chat box again. What issues of prejudice might teachers come across during this time? And why is there a need to build understanding of others during this time? Well, we just want those who are responding to these questions to, again, hold on to those thoughts. But one thing that we want to point out is that nationwide, we are seeing an increase of prejudice and anti-Asian sentiment, as well as anti-Semitic sentiment, that there has been a rise of prejudice. But something that I personally question myself, is it so much that there is a rise, or is it that because we are putting a lens where we are looking at these things, are we just now noticing what has always been there? The next slide. And so before we move on, we want to have another critical reminder that we must design our lessons online and offline with culture responsiveness in mind. But the true challenge in balancing any type of quality instruction is acknowledging the humanity of our students and the families during this time. And again, this is all too true with some of the challenges that COVID is placing our families in, where there might have been stress, anxiety, and trauma before. COVID has compounded stress, anxiety, and trauma for many of our learners. Next slide, Avon. And so with that being said, we want to always keep in mind that we are in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. And that most important during this time, our role as teachers is to love our students, love our family. And as best as we can, we're providing work that is quality, not quantity. We are not pulling on our students' boats with paperwork. We're not trying to drown our students in paperwork and busy time. We want to, again, support families and our students in being a part of their structured day. And that we also want to provide wise feedback over assessment. And this is applicable not only to our students who are doing the digital NTI, but our students who are working through the paperverse version of NTI as well. We want to extend this same type of love before lessons, quality over quantity, and wise feedback over assessment with all of our students. Because again, we are all in the same storm, though our boats are different. Next slide. So, as I was speaking to earlier, we are specifically talking today about prejudice elimination. This component is part of a tool known as the R tool that we have amended and revised to be able to fit for NTI. So really, we're looking at how are we affirming racial equity during this non-traditional instructional time. Again, today we are talking about prejudice elimination, and tomorrow we'll be talking about equitable pedagogy. And if you haven't already, you can check out past sessions on the YouTube channel where we discuss knowledge construction and content integration as well. But this is a simplified version of, again, some of the tips and strategies that we can use to be able to support our learners that come from diverse populations. And within each section is embedded, again, a series of resources and tools to be able to use. If you find yourself answering these questions, are you intentionally planning lessons to build understanding of foster intergroup relations? If you're a no, well, then again, we have the supports there. Aiden, next slide. And so when we're talking about prejudice elimination, we're talking about encouraging teachers and PLCs to design and plan lessons to build understanding and foster intergroup relations. Effectively, our objective is to have a practice that promotes prejudice elimination that can have a positive impact on instruction, classroom culture, and student success, especially as it concerns NTI. Next slide. So in order to achieve the objective, again, we want to identify practices that promote prejudice elimination, but we also want to explore and identify tools and resources to use during NTI to foster those positive outcomes. Next slide. So with that being said, one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is, are we aware of content that may be considered inflammatory and can we amplify the voice of the oppressed at this time? Because when we are hearing in our media things like COVID being referred to as the Chinese virus, well, if we don't understand how that's inflammatory and how that's actually not amplifying the voice of oppressed, it's feeding into what is called the pyramid of hate. And so this graphic itself will take you to the source resource where it has more information about how something like a small biased comment actually feeds into much larger systems of harm. And again, we as teachers can have the power to be able to disrupt these systems of harm by, again, serving as models. And we'll speak to that again later. And educating ourselves as well as to what is content that's considered inflammatory. And again, we see examples of that lack of awareness all the time in the news. Recently, a multi-billion company, Lululemon, one of their employees, one of their art directors, was selling a shirt that said "back fried rice." Now, again, if the individual is not aware of how that's actually harming those that have oppressed voices, then again, they're feeding into this larger system where we have acts of discrimination leading to motivated violence that ultimately is leading to genocidal acts. Next slide, Avon.
Do you feel that a lot of teachers, just in my experience being a classroom teacher, they feel like those are like hands-off issues a lot of times? They feel like if that comes up, like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't address that because I'm afraid I might say the wrong thing or come off as leaning one way or another.
Well, it's not a hands-off issue, and it cannot be a hands-off issue given the nature of what school is. School is a microcosm of society. School is a reflection of society. And oftentimes, it's our school systems that can serve as again, the disruptors or enablers of harm. And we only have to look at our own timelines, our own recent timelines of something like Brown versus Board. What did Brown versus Board eventually spiral into when teachers stepped up to accepting all students into their classrooms. When teachers spoke up against the fact that segregating white and Black students was not acceptable, was not something that we as educators should be part of. So again, these are not issues that are separate from our classroom. These are issues that, again, are also very much in alignment with our standards as well, because our standards aren't isolated concepts. Our standards aren't dead and inorganic. Our standards are very much actionable, organic skills that's asking us to look at our world, our society, and the content that our society and our world is producing. So if we are putting a barrier between ourselves and, something that we perceive as taboo, then again, what are we actually achieving? How are we actually empowering our students? And with that being said, again, part of that, Avon, can you go back to the previous slide? Part of this slide and the next slide is that awareness, is that we have to, again, educate ourselves as to what is the value of the content that we are engaging our learners with. And if we only understand our content at a very shallow level, then again, how are we preparing our learners for the 21st century society? We just can't read a picture book and just have it be at the end of that. We have to understand, like, how are we using something like a picture book as a tool to empower our learners? When we have a text that has brown and Black faces, how are we empowering our learners with, again, authentic, diverse text? So again, it's never something that we should shy away from, but it is something that we do have to educate ourselves about.
I agree.
Even next.
Thank you.
And so on that note, are you, JCPS, aware of the controversial, demeaning, and offensive and emotionally charged content statements that minoritized groups have to come in contact with? And how are we modeling value difference? So the resources that we provided here are linked to two teaching tolerance sources. One is specific to how do we speak up against bias during COVID. And another one is just a general resource overall that's much more comprehensive about how do we serve as a model and address bias commentary again, at a much larger scale, how to model that for your students, how to engage your students in that speaking up. But essentially, we as teachers have to be those models for our learners, because our learners have us as an exemplar for models of, again, how to be members of society. So again, the two resources that we have here that will support that awareness of how to speak up against controversial, demeaning, or offensively or emotionally charged content, and how to be a model of valuing difference comes from Teaching Tolerance and is the Speak Up, serving as a model. Avon, could you actually hover over that and click that for us? Yes, thank you. And again, within this article, there are embedded tips and strategies. And Avon, can you go scroll down? So again, just very simplified steps for how we can, again, begin to either build up that practice or further our practice of how we can speak up against bias so that we're not feeding into that pyramid of hate. Following the steps of interrupting, questioning, educating, and echoing. And this article does give, again, examples of how to do those steps. And then, Avon, can you go back to the slide? Can you click addressing bias commentary? And again, this is the whole document for the Speak Up Strategy Guide. And this is differentiated for how to use this with your peer group, how to use this as an administrator, how to use this with students, et cetera, et cetera. Because again, the role of being an advocate is not just from bell to bell. If you're an advocate, you have to be an advocate outside of the school as well. Avon, can we go back to the slide?
A lot of my responsibility is helping students become good digital citizens. And we've had a lot of questions about now that teachers are having meets with students, meeting with them virtually. They say, well, what if a student does this or says this or is acting like this during the meet? And I'm like, you have to teach them to be good digital citizens. That's what our technology leaders do. But also as teachers, we have to teach them to be good citizens. And I think this is a big part of that. Yes.
And to that note, speaking of digital citizenship, we also have to build up an element of how to recognize prejudice when students are interacting with tools and just things in the digital sphere, because that's where a lot of our text is, especially during NTI. Our students are exposed to so much. How do we recognize a resource that is inflammatory as opposed to not being inflammatory? So again, this is something that carries much into how we can build up our learners to be good digital citizens as well. Okay, and then Avon, next slide. And we also want to help our students understand privilege and empathy. And this component of prejudice emulation is something that feeds into the NTI tool overall, because this can best be achieved by designing mini lessons or activities to really help students build their understanding. And so the two resources that we provided here are broken down into activities and mini lessons that focus more on elementary, and activities and mini lessons that focus more on secondary. And one of the reasons why we're emphasizing mini lessons, task activities, as opposed to whole unit plans is because, again, we want to consider quality over quantity. We want to take into consideration the humanity of our families, of being able to have access or limited access to devices, of having multiple children in the home, where again, there's time that has to be respected. So we really don't want to have something that's long and intensive for our learners. These mini lessons and activities can very much be built into long form units, but really they can also be scaled down, because that's something that, again, that we want to keep in mind. And just overall, teaching tolerance does maintain a student library of text, written text, visuals, and auditory text that speak to how to use those texts within these mini lessons. And then again, we want to make sure that we can use this tool comprehensively, because it's not just about prejudice elimination during NTI. It's about using these skills, using this toolbox to be able to achieve the objectives of our district-wide racial equity plan. And then Avon, last slide. Actually, Avon, you can click on the elementary or secondary. Okay. So again, and this is something that the previous presentations have spoken to, that one place that we want to start is the formation of a solid question in which a number of activities, tasks, and things can be built in. We don't want to have a question that's so close-ended that can just be achieved with one worksheet, one unit, just simplified. We want to be able to have comprehensive questions that really push our learners into looking at the world around them. Aiden, can you go back and look at the secondary link for us? And so again, this is more examples of text and activities and tasks that can be used to support prejudice elimination. Because one thing that we also want to do to support teachers is we don't want teachers to have to reinvent the wheel. We want to be able to use what are the already established resources that we have available to us as educators to be able to support things like eliminating bias and prejudice with our instruction. And at the same time, with this already created and established resource, how can I use that to educate myself as the educator? Avon, go ahead to the presentation. And so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close out. Were there any questions that we had at this time before I go over contacts, who to contact and whatnot?
We had a lot of people really like what you're saying, like what's being shared, and they look forward to the new resource that you were referring to. I forget what the speak up.
Speak up strategies.
Yes, speak up strategies. Yes, thank you. A lot of people are excited about getting comfortable with that and using that.
Yes. And if you all need any supports with the speak up strategies, the art tool during NTI, please do not hesitate to reach out to your zone resource teacher. Zone 1 is Katia Turner for elementary schools. Zone 2 is Shashway McCormack for elementary schools. Zone 3, Lamanda Moore Rodriguez for elementary schools. I myself, Kenita Ballard, I am over the AIS elementary schools through Zone 1, 2, and 3. Rachel Klein is middle schools and AIS middle schools as well. And then our newest addition, Avon Cook, is high schools as well as AIS high schools. And so with that being said, we just want to all thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact either one of us.
Kenita, I did have a question. We do have about 6 more minutes, and I can. It's no problem. But if you can, someone said, can you model the speak up strategies or show the document? Yes.
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Let's see. Avon, will you click back to the slide or will you click over to the link of speak up? Yes, the serving as a model.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So with that being said, and scroll down, Avon. With that being said, teaching tolerance is just well structured overall. And oftentimes they have not only examples of some commentary that you will hear, but how to respond to it. And so some of just the way that we support our students with accountable talk and sentence starters, that is how the speak up strategies function. So oftentimes, if we hear something that's disparaging, we can say something like, before we talk about that, I want to talk about the language you use. So an interrupt strategy that is a speak up strategy, it doesn't make the student feel like they're being targeted for saying something that might have been biased or prejudiced. And it doesn't make it about a punitive reaction. It's a platform that you're creating to discuss, where did you hear that language from? Why are you using that language? Again, it's about getting at the humanity of all of this. And the same thing for Avon, scroll down. Avon, scroll down. Thank you. Stop right there for the questions. And similarly for questions, this is, again, not about targeting the individuals, because we might also hear our fellow teachers use language like this. This is about really breaking down prejudice and bias by doing something like questioning it. Like, why do you think that? Where did you get that information from? Because again, it's not about attacking the individual. It's about eliminating concepts and ideas that feed into that pyramid of hate. And by this way of questioning it, you're really able to, again, enrich the dialogue. Because again, we are very much in the business of working with people. So we don't want to attack our peers. We don't want to attack our learners. We want to, just like in the classroom, be able to identify a misconception and manage the misconception. But here, we know that the stakes are all too high for, if we don't manage the misconception or the misinformation, that there are real life stakes where our people are being harmed and oppressed through biased statements being rampant.
So I don't want to open a can of worms here, but I guess because you're a pro and I do want to pick your brain about this, So what if someone has bias or prejudice and they are using religion or political affiliation to defend what they're saying? Like, how do you approach that?
Well, if it's a religious defense, well, that's questionable in itself because do we not have separation of church and state?
I agree. I'm with you, but
You
yes.
can very much acknowledge that. Well, I understand that that's your personal view. However, we're not just working with people that share the same religion as you. We're not just in a community with people that share the same religion as you.
Okay.
You have leaders that are sharing the same religion as you. We have to keep on going back to the fact that we live in an increasing diverse society, an increasing brown society, and we want to be able to function in that society. So again, it's not about having a different religion. It's not about having a view that because of something that of our own personal attitude, where we might disagree with this, it's about how are we supporting our learners. And if we have a personal attitude that's getting in the way of us supporting our learners, then again, we really have to question how effective we are as educators. Because again, it's not about us as teachers. It's about our learners. It's about our community. And eventually, our learners are going to become adults and they're going to be the ones to take care of us. We don't want our soon to be adult learners to be in a position where they weren't as prepared as much as they could in life because of our own personal biases and stereotypes and prejudices that got in the way of us supporting our students as wholly as we could.
Thank you. I love that. And if any teacher is in a situation where they don't feel comfortable having those conversations or addressing that or want strategies, they can reach out to any of their zone leaders, and I'm sure you're there to help them.
Mm-hmm. And then I believe in the chat, our resource teachers will be dropping off a reflection just so that we can follow up additionally on what all supports that we can support our district teachers in.